This is 97-year-old Giuseppa Porcu. She lives in the mint perfume mountains of Sardinia, on top of a little hill in a large house, at the bottom of which is her still tended vegetable patch. Now, what's your response? Most people go, "Oh, isn't she cute? Isn't she adorable?" And it's true. She and all the pasta grannies are a virtual warm hug. But I want to spend a few minutes with you discussing why these signora anziani, or elderly ladies, are more than cute. They are the repository of domestic skills and traditions which are fast fading away in Italy. When we think of Italian gastronomy, who are the ambassadors, the torchbearers? The answer is probably famous chefs, lots of them in fact when it comes to Italian cooking. But the question we have to ask is, how far is their cooking an interpretation or an adaptation of Italian cooking? How far has it travelled from the domestic kitchen? And who is their inspiration? Because the answer is probably their mum or their grandmother. And where are these women in the food media landscape? Who is telling their stories? And in fact, why aren't they telling their own stories? They're pretty much invisible, which is a little bit crazy because their cooking is the backbone of Italian gastronomy. Or to put it another way, they are beloved but taken for granted. And that means that their skills and experience is dying with them. And I noticed this when I was doing some research in my region of Italy called Le Marche. No women under the age of 70 was making pasta by hand on a daily basis. And that's not so surprising because, you know, these women are going out to work like women everywhere on the planet. And I thought, oh, why is this? And the answer is because they want to put their mothers' hard labour and lack of opportunity behind them. They're not interested in what their mothers did. And so my response to that was, well, let's make a record of those women and that experience. And I picked up a video camera and Pasta Grannies was born. But the important thing about video is that it captures the physicality of pasta making. And it shows the rhythm that you get from decades of making pasta and rolling it out. And it of course also captures the personality of these women. Lina's experience is pretty typical. In 1930, only 6 kids out of every 100 achieved their high school diploma. By 1958, that number had risen to 9. And the reason for this is that boys and girls were needed to work in the fields because of the lack of large machinery like combine harvesters. And that meant they left school at the age of 10. And for girls, there were 2 things they could do. The first is be a farm labourer, and the second is be a seamstress. The vast majority of our pasta grannies worked as needlewomen. And as an example, here is Maria. 86-year-old Maria is from Faenza, and she remembers having to make pasta before she went to school when she was about 6 or 7. And the other thing that she had to do was lead the oxen as they ploughed the fields. And after she left school, in the winter months, she hand-sewed lingerie for a smart shop in Bologna. But above all, women's main job was to get married and have lots of children. And to do that, they had to be able to cook and, in particular, make pasta. And as we've seen with Lina, girls from about the age of 6 or 7 were given dough to play with. And this is Bianca, who is being taught by her granny Rosetta how to make trofia. Now, Bianca is probably going to grow up to be a rocket scientist, but for her great-grandmother, it was more difficult. Literacy was not as important as pasta making. And a great example is Rosa from Faenza. She remembers her prospective father-in-law coming round to check on her pasta making. He wanted to be absolutely certain she was good enough as a pasta maker for his beloved son. In those days, back in the 1930s, Antibiotics weren't as available as they are now, and that meant parents quite often died and leaving girls to bring up the family on their own from a very young age. And a good example of this is Franquina from Cilento. She was 8 when her mum died, and she didn't know anything, and a neighbour took pity on her and showed her the basics, and that was it. Franquina was left to bring up the family on her own. She was a teenager when she started work as a construction worker. Franquina is about 4'11" and she weighs about 106 pounds, and she was carrying more than her own weight in bricks. So it's no surprise that her kids kind of go, "Ooh, I don't want that lifestyle." And in fact, one of her sons is a physicist in Milan. Now, in the 1950s, there was an economic boom in Italy. And with the rise in affluence and disposable income, there developed another job opportunity for women, and that was making pasta at home. And this professional, nearly professional activity has a special name for these women. It's called la sforlina. And this arrangement suits women because they can make the pasta at home and then they deliver it to a restaurant or a specialist shop at their convenience. It's often cash only. It is therefore an informal arrangement. So handmade pasta is venerated throughout Italy, but it's the restaurants and the chefs who are lauded, not the women who made it. And in fact, I can think of only one celebrity chef who acknowledges his sforlina, and that's Massimo Bottura and his restaurant Osteria Francescana in Modena. Pasta making is a chore which even the women themselves take for granted. I always enjoy their stunned husbands lurking in the background. You can see their thought bubbles. It's like, what's going on? Why are you taking an interest in something as everyday as pasta making? It's like the equivalent of making baked beans on toast for them. Meanwhile, these women's expertise is the basis for global adoration of Italian cooking and for handmade pasta in particular. And the trouble is that their experience is in danger of not being saluted as it passes. As we've seen, they're not particularly literate, so they're not writing it down, and I rarely see a recipe book on their shelves. So what are we going to do about it? Now, none of us want to be tied to the kitchen sink, but to scramble my metaphors horribly, we're in danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're losing precious knowledge, and we're forgetting how to cook properly from scratch. But all is not lost. I've noticed that you guys, the great-grandchildren of women born in the 1930s and 40s, are taking a big interest. And that's wonderful. It means that you have a choice. You can have a stellar career and make pasta like Rosa. Better still, you have the opportunity to applaud the women whose life experiences made them experts. They're not just cute, they're resilient.